All right, our next presenter is Dr. Mark Geil, and his presentation is Challenging Convention Kids with Limb Loss from the Wellstar College of Health and Human Services.
Okay, this is me in 1997, fresh out of grad school at Ohio State, starting my first faculty job at Georgia Tech. 2 little girls in tow, one just learning to crawl. I was just learning to teach and eager to start my research career. I'm a biomedical engineer who studies walking, which is a lot more complicated than you might think. Imagine building a 175-pound lamp. You put all the weight about 3 feet off the ground and you put it on a teeny tiny little base, and the base is off center too. As an engineer, I can tell you that's an unstable design. But that's us. We are unstable by design. We're unstable because we don't just stand, we move. We walk and run, we get up out of chairs and climb stairs. Stability is good, it's safe, but stability and mobility tend to be at odds with one another. So we're built like goofy lamps, unstable by design. That's what I study, complex mobility. And in particular, I study walking in individuals with movement challenges like cerebral palsy, injury, and primarily limb loss and amputation. I find it's best to work with clinicians, so as I started my faculty career, I started knocking on doors. That's when I found 2 wonderful people at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, Brian Gividoni, who's head of prosthetics, and Colleen Coulter, who's a pediatric physical therapist. They work with children who have amputations, and they had a pretty radical idea about when a child should receive a prosthetic knee. This new idea came to be known as the Early Knee Project. So here's the idea. Traditionally, when a young child is either born with limb loss or acquires an amputation, she receives her first prosthesis right about the time when she's learning to pull up to a standing position. This first prosthetic limb does not contain a knee joint. The idea is the child needs a stable base to learn to stand before she can think about trying to flex a prosthetic knee. The fear is that the child will start to walk and fall over and won't develop proper balance and upright posture. Once the child is standing and walking on the straight leg, she is transitioned to a prosthesis with a working knee joint, which is somewhere around age 3 to 5. This has been the plan for decades. It's in the medical school textbooks. It's the standard of care. Except this whole standard has been based on an assumption. No one ever tried to put a knee in an infant child. Everyone just assumed the kids would fail. This entire prescription protocol has been based on untested conventional wisdom. Well, we have seen the enemy, and the enemy is conventional wisdom. Back to knocking on doors at Showa. Colleen and Brian said, we're giving infants a working prosthetic knee in their first prosthesis, and we think they're doing great. We need data to prove this works. And I said, data about walking? I can do that. And so began a very fruitful collaboration. This was our first attempt. I had not worked with children before, and we weren't really equipped for it. The poor kid almost fell over when we attached all of our markers and electrodes, and we said, okay, walk normally. But we got better. We improved our equipment, our techniques, and our patience. We learned the magical power of Cheerios, and that babies will pull off our little reflective markers and try to eat them, and that they're really fast and really sneaky. We studied children crawling and walking, and quickly learned that if you give them a knee, they will use the knee. In fact, they flex it a lot like typically developing children. The black line here is knee flexion for typically developing 2 to 5-year-olds. The blue line at the bottom is what happens if you're an amputee who is not given a working prosthetic knee. The red line is knee flexion for our kids with congenital unilateral transfemoral amputation. That's a prosthetic knee flexing almost exactly like an anatomical knee. The Early Knee Prosthetic Prescription Protocol works, and we have data to prove it. We also learned that not having a working knee when you're learning to walk is kind of horrible. It's in the way, and it's just not just about walking. It doesn't allow kids to develop typical fine motor skills, like you see here in this tall kneel position that requires knee flexion. I'll never forget this one 2-year-old child in our early knee protocol. We tested her normal walking, and then we locked her knee so that she could duplicate what she would have been in if she was in the traditional protocol. She took 2 steps and stopped. She looked down at her prosthetic leg, then she turned back to her mom and started crying. She knew her knee wasn't working right, and she wanted mom to fix it. This wasn't just a prosthetic leg. It had become part of her. She used it just like she used her eyes or her arms, and she counted on it. So we collected data, lots of data. We got a grant from the Gerber Foundation, and we made some important discoveries about how kids move and interact with a prosthesis, and what happens to their gait long-term if the prosthesis is suboptimal. And we've learned that adaptations that develop without a knee are really hard to get rid of. We learned that in general, we don't give kids enough credit. They are adaptable and resilient. They're really good at figuring out mobility. And it's our job to give them the tools to do so, just like their typically developing peers. And here's the best news. We're changing those medical textbooks. Kids around the country are receiving prosthetic knees in their first prosthesis, and the conventional wisdom is being challenged in the best way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I would love a t-shirt that says "Unstable by Design." I'd wear it all the time.